Maria Ryan is Web Archivist at the National Library of Ireland and co-chair of the International Internet Preservation Consortium's training group. Maria is responsible for the development of library collections in the openly available Selective Web Archive, which preserves the record of the Irish web. And today Maria is going to tell us more about this and archiving an international pandemic online.
Thanks, Joanna. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you this morning about the Web Archive and more specifically how we in the National Library are archiving an international pandemic online. So we're lucky enough to have an international audience this morning. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the National Library for those of you who mightn't be familiar. We are 143 years old this year, and we were founded in 1877. We have a rich history on Kildare Street. Many of you will know our buildings there. And that's our main library, looking a bit newer these days. But anyway, in 1927, we became a legal deposit library for Ireland. And we were also the office of the Chief Herald and home of the National Photographic Archive. The NLI has about 90 full-time equivalent staff with an annual budget of 7.8 million euros. And we are led by our mission, our established collecting history, but also by our 2016 to 2021 strategy and other policies like our diversity and inclusion policy and collection development policy. So for those of you who've not visited us, we are spread out over 4 buildings, mainly on Kildare Street, but also in Temple Bar. And in 2018, we added our Seamus Heaney exhibition, which is located in the Bank of Ireland on College Green. And last year, we launched our new partnership with University College Dublin, the Museum of Literature Ireland, or MALI. So the NLI has 3 primary collecting areas, and they are printed, special collections, and digital collections. There are 4, these are the main collecting strands of the NLI, and they are supported by our colleagues in our development office, our education, learning and programming department, and our estates and administrative departments. So digital collections was formed in 2015, and we are a mix of IT professionals, librarians and archivists, and we are responsible for digitization, foreign digital collecting, the Web Archive, which I'll talk to you about today, and also the IT infrastructure and the digital preservation, including the repository for the entire library. So we are a small team, but we work together to achieve our collecting goals and contribute to the overall mission of the library. So for more information on the history of the NLI, you can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. And obviously you can visit us in person whenever we reopen to the public. So to get started today, I thought I'd start with a quick definition of web archiving for those of you who may not be familiar with web archiving. So it's the process of collecting portions of the World Wide Web, preserving these collections in an archival format, and then serving those archives for access and use. This is from the International Internet Preservation Consortium, of which the NLI are members. So web archiving is all about preservation, so preserving these portions of the web for future research and study. It's often helpful to include a list of what web archiving is not. It's not Google indexing or bookmarking a page and saving a hyperlink. It's not the cataloging of a live website or right-clicking and saving as. And the most common misconception, it is not taking a screenshot or screen recording. It's important to remember that web archiving is all about preservation and preserving that point of access that we have on the internet. And one of the most common questions I'm asked is, why does the NLI archive the web? There's a number of answers to this question. The web changes really quickly. It's estimated that a web page changes or disappears every 90 to 100 days. So that's not a very long lifespan when compared to traditional physical archives that we're used to. It's a rich source of information. It's obviously where we get our news from. And it's also an important documentation of culture. One could simply not study the late 20th or 21st centuries without looking at the web. And it also offers accountability, in particular when we think about the amount of government bodies that publish now primarily online. And finally, for us in the NLI, we see the Web Archive as a continuation of our collecting strategies, a necessary activity to achieve our mission in the 21st century. And our mission today is the same as it was all those years ago. And that is to collect, preserve and promote and make accessible the documentary and intellectual record of the life of Ireland. And without preserving the web, we cannot achieve this mission in the 21st century. When people ask why we collect the web, I answer as well, so that in 50 or 100 years' time, the Irish people will have a record of society, culture and political life in Ireland at this point. What if the National Library had failed to collect the work of Yeats, or if we hadn't invested in the collection and preservation of early photographs, or collected a record of the revolutionary period in Ireland? Or what if we hadn't collected newspapers under legal deposit, or prints and drawings depicting Ireland's rich cultural legacy? This is why the National Library collects the web, because it is an invaluable resource both now and in the future. And I hope to show you why that is today. So I'm going to take you back to 2011, and my colleague Della Keating began collecting the online record of the general and presidential elections of that year. And following this successful pilot project, the NLI Web Archive was formally established. From 2012 to 2016, the NLI Web Archive continued to develop, and some collections from this period include blogs, cultural websites, a collection on the Gathering, if we remember what that was, and political collections including all referendums, local elections, general elections, and some political movements as well. In 2016, a full-time resource was appointed to the Web Archive, and that year we had the Remembering 1916 Recording 2016 project, which was to record the Easter Rising and the Irish involvement in the First World War and the online representation of those commemorations. And this project involved the archiving of over 450 websites to do with commemorations, and it's the largest collection in the Web Archive to date. In 2017, a permanent resource was assigned to the Web Archive, and since then we have focused on developing, growing and promoting the National Web Archive. The NLI engages in selective web archiving, which is thematic or event-based. That is to say, we archive websites around certain events, for example, general elections, and around themes or topics such as arts and culture. We engage in rapid response collecting, which means we aim to respond to events as quickly as possible. And I can often be found web archiving in the small hours of the morning and on weekends, particularly around elections when results are announced into the night. Such is the nature of the web. And I particularly feel for my colleagues in America at the moment. We are dedicated to capturing material as soon as possible and ensuring its preservation in the national collection. We work with the Internet Archive, the not-for-profit organization based in San Francisco. Web archiving has come a long way, even since I began in the NLI 4 years ago. It's a relatively recent activity, but we keep up to date with technical developments and are active members of the International Internet Preservation Consortium and the Digital Preservation Coalition. However, technical restrictions still apply, and that's particularly around social media, and they challenge they pose the most challenges to us. We are also restricted by the lack of legislation in Ireland pertaining to web archiving. Ireland has illegal deposit, however, it does not extend to web archiving, and the NLI continues to work with our board and the relevant government departments to bring about a change in this situation. Selectively archiving websites means we have difficult decisions. We have to make difficult decisions about what we collect. First and foremost, we cannot collect everything, and nor would we want everything that's out there. But we do try to get a wide representation of Irish life. And the NLI have a number of policies in place to help us fulfil our remit, and that includes our collection developments policy and our diversity and inclusion policy, and they help us collect and develop our collections. So some of the initial questions we ask when scoping a collection are, is the website at risk of being deleted or substantially changed? Is it Irish of Irish interest? And can the website be archived? Is there any known technical restrictions? Another consideration we have is, can we tell who owns the website? We are required to notify the owners of websites of our intention to archive a site. So if the website has no email address or no way to contact the owners, we cannot archive the website. And then this generally isn't a problem, but it has been in the past. But at the same time, it's worth pointing out that we've had very few refusals over the past 9-10 years. There is the full-time equivalent staff of 1.4 on the Web Archive, and we are responsible for web archiving in the National Library. So we're responsible from start to finish. It is us who selects the majority of the websites, and so this would compare quite strongly with other national libraries who would have large teams of curators and web archivists on site. A website is a published item in the same way a book is published, but in our experience, some people don't assume that their website is a publication, and therefore they don't have the expectation for it to be archived. And then this is something that we need to be mindful of, in particular in the absence of legislation. And we seek to consult academics and subject specialists around issues such as elections and referendums, and we seek nominations from the general public. Web archiving is a developing field, and so we're facing new issues all the time. And the key to mitigating some of these issues and questions the answer is collaboration and transparency. And in the NLI, we document our selection decisions and make them available through our website. So that kind of transparency on our part outlines our decision making, and it's something that we're committed to continuing. So here is some of, oops, I need to go back. Oops. So these are some of the topics that we collect. So politics, social issues such as trade union action, housing crisis, cultural and creative events such as commemorations, design and literature. And we also work with government departments to archive websites that are redesigned or changed. And all of these can be explored through the Web Archive on the NLI website. Before I talk about COVID-19, I'm going to outline a very simplified version of the web archiving process. It starts with the selection of material, which I've already discussed. And so once our seed list or our desired websites are selected, this moves then to the notification phase, which I've already said that we have to find a contact for each website. So if we can't find one, then we have to go back to the selection stage. But once owners are notified, we move to the archiving stage or the crawling stage. And as I said, we work with Internet Archive, and they provide the technology for us to archive websites. We test crawl most websites before permanently archiving them. So if there are any technical restrictions or technical problems, we'll catch them in this phase before we permanently archive the website. And so if we can't archive a website, we have to go back to the selection phase. Crawling usually lasts between 7 days and a month, so it's quite a long period. But once this is complete, we move to the QA stage. And then finally, when everything has been given the green light, we make them available through our portal. And as I said, there's a million more steps really in reality here. And this is just a simplified version of our workflow. Here is our web access portal, which is available from the National Library's homepage. And from here, you can browse the collections or search individual websites and pages. And so now I'm going to turn to our COVID-19 collection and how the pandemic has impacted how we collect. When it became apparent that Ireland was going to be affected by COVID-19, we were still busy in the Web Archives team with our general election collection. But the collecting really began in February, early March. The National Library, along with all other cultural institutions, closed its doors on the 12th of March, and we were sent to work from home. Working remotely has not largely affected us in the Web Archive and on the Web Archive team, because it's been business as usual for us, and obviously we've been quite busy. And we gained a new co-worker. This is Mr. Pickles. He was my helper. a bit useless, but nonetheless. And with no end in sight, it was going to be vastly different to events that we were used to capturing. So events that we just done, like the general election. So we needed a new approach, and we needed to get to grips with it really quickly. And so while we worked on developing a new approach and figuring out how best to respond to this pandemic, we decided we needed to archive some of the primary online information sources. These were rapidly changing, and it was important to archive them as quickly as possible. And we also needed to decide how frequently they should be archived and what was feasible for us to achieve. So we decided on a set of 6 core websites, and these were all, again, rapidly changing websites, and they were the most important to archive. So they included the Health Service Executive, the HSE, the Health Protection Surveillance Centre, the HPSC, gov.ie, which is the portal for all government websites in Ireland and the government's own website, the journal.ie, which is an online news source that we've archived since 2011, Tuairisc, which is an Irish online only news source, and RTE News as well. These 6 websites were initially archived weekly and then fortnightly. And when the situation stabilized a bit, when the phases were introduced, we then moved to archiving them when a new phase was introduced, or when a new phase was, when we rolled back into an old phase as it occurred. So these contain a record of how the pandemic evolved in Ireland and will be invaluable in the future. Here is some of the earliest mentions of COVID-19 in the NLI Web Archive, and it's actually from the general election collection, as you can see. So it hadn't hit our shores. The death toll in China was 1,000, and we know obviously it grew to be much more. And we all thought that the biggest news story of the year was going to be the general election, but in fact it wasn't. Collecting the journal has continued throughout the year. And this is from last year. So obviously a very different case. And I don't need to tell you or remind you how the year has unfolded. But it's just an example of what we have collected in the national collection. When we had decided our initial response, we needed to consider what was next. How would we best record the pandemic with the limited resources we had? And firstly, we looked at the key areas and sectors that were affected by COVID-19. And I hear what you're saying, that's absolutely everything and every facet of life. But we needed to be sure that we selected a good representation of sectors and areas in Irish life. And web archiving is always about learning to deal with the unknown. We didn't know how long the list would be until we went and looked. And so first we compiled a list of the important areas, and these included the ones that are on your screen there. So government and public bodies, the health industry, obviously, all levels of education, hospitality, including pubs and restaurants, tourism, minority communities, including those in direct provision, and last but not least, community responses. So those heartwarming efforts that saw local community groups contributing to the effort. And we felt they were some of the most important areas to capture an online reflection of, and obviously not forgetting anything to do with sport, culture, and a whole host of other things have also been included. There were other factors to take into consideration, like how would we select the websites, what our budget and staff resources were. We had already archived a good amount of our allotted number of websites with the general election, so we needed to examine our resources both financially and staffing and see what was possible. How do we deal with the uncertainty of such an incomprehensible situation, and how do we, I suppose, anticipate future researcher needs? And when do we archive? Again, we don't have the resources to archive on a daily or weekly basis, so the majority of selected websites would only be archived once. And how do we maximize the amount of content we archive without increasing the risk of losing content substantially? And we needed to keep up with what the government were doing and their phase plans. So would that affect the web archive? And finally, so what are others doing? And it's a global pandemic, so it's really useful to be part of an international community and see what our colleagues are doing abroad. This very much is not the final product, we don't really know what the final product would look like, obviously, as we're still archiving websites. But by the end of this year, there will be about over 200 websites collected, and some of them obviously will be collected more than once. And they're from all the sectors I mentioned in the previous slides. So we initially followed the government plan. So for example, when the different phases were introduced, so when builders were allowed back on site, we archived the construction industry's websites, and we archived relevant websites, for example, when sports recommenced and when the hairdressers came back. So we tried to get that on a phase basis, but obviously that kind of didn't really work, because then we started rolling forward and then rolling back. So every year we archive other collections, including all higher education bodies, local authorities, trade unions, all the websites of all the GLAMs in Ireland. And all of those sectors obviously were really affected by COVID-19. And so we moved these crawl dates around to maximize the COVID-19 content collected. So for example, we pushed the usual date of our local authority collection, which is usually earlier in the year, to later, to maximize this content. And while this was all going on, the frequent crawls of our regular 6 were continuing. So generally, when new announcements were made. And as 2019 comes to an end, we're looking to next year and what the situation will be like. And obviously we don't know, nobody knows. And that feeling of uncertainty obviously is still with us, and it's with us all in our personal lives as well. But we will definitely look to balance COVID-19 collecting with collecting our other collections. So as life continues as normal, we need to reflect that normal and the usual parts of our life, so including our collections on sport, rural life, older and younger people, and that's just a few of what we hope to resume doing next year. And we also continue to look for submissions of websites to the Web Archive. So if you do have any, please do get in touch with me. And we have also made approaches to subject specialists to make recommendations on what to collect, and that's a really important part of what we do in the National Library. And another important part is our outreach work. So that will continue, looking for researchers to collaborate with on the Web Archive collections. And so that's just some of the things that we're hoping to do next year. I'm going to leave it there. If you have any comments, queries or suggestions, please do get in touch. So I'm going to hand back to Joanna now. Thank you.